Welcome back, honors. Let's get after it. All right, so we left off in class talking about the Congress of Vienna, right? And we talked about how it was from 1814 to 1815. And really, we're going to do this right now. And what it was a meeting held to try and split up what was left of all the stuff that Napoleon had conquered, right? Now, at that meeting, they had discussed a creating of a German state. Slow down. You need to write this word down. It's very, very important. There's a word of kind of what the state of these German lands were, all right? So write down this word. Principality, all right? So principality. A principality is an informal territory ruled over by a hereditary monarch usually, or a local government, but it's a very small informal state, okay? Now, after the dissolving of the Holy Roman Empire when Napoleon invaded, there were about 300 of these principalities just floating around in the air, all right? Sitting around in the mist, ready for other people to snatch up. Now, the main, so speaking of this, following the Congress of Vienna, they try to organize these principalities a little bit better. There were 300 of them, and they take that number and they condense it down into about 39, all right? So they now only have 39 principalities, and they form this thing called the German Confederation. The main problem coming out of the Congress of Vienna, though, scribble out Napoleon and put, actually just kind of reword this whole thing, and just put, the main problem is other powerful Europeans start grabbing up some of these principalities and trying to bring them into their country, right? So you've got some of these little things being left out to dry. So some of the countries that you have that are pushing forward, though, you got Prussia, of course, being one of these. They're not really a principality. They're a country, right? But they're kind of there. They're the strongest out of all the German-speaking people, with the exception of Austria. And then you've got a lot of random little ones floating around. You got a big one called Bavaria that's very important that you get. That's in the south of the German lands, like in the former Holy Roman Empire. They're Catholic, so that was a big hiccup. Now, speaking of, though, don't write that. This guy is going to step in to try and unite all of those principalities together and create what he called the German Empire, right? He was going to be like, you know what? We might be a lesser Germany, Austria, but we're going for it anyway, all right? So this guy's name was none other than the Otto von Bismarck, all right? Some of y'all are like, this guy can't be that important. I've never heard of him before. Well, you can shut up because he's extremely important. Otto von Bismarck is probably one of the top 10 marquee people in all of European history. Straight up, not even going to lie to you, all right? You got other really, really important guys like, you know, Martin Luther, very, very important, even though, you know, he just kind of took some other ideas from, like, John Wycliffe and stuff and just made it popular. We're not going to get into my list right now. But Otto von Bismarck is phenomenally important, right? And had they actually carried out this Chancellor's ideas, notice he's a Chancellor. He is not actually a Kaiser, mainly because he is not a what again? Good job, Madigan. He's not a Hohenzollern, right? He's not from the ruling family of Prussia, so he's not actually the Kaiser of these lands ever. He's a chancellor. He's a guy behind the scenes. He's like a vice president, if you will, okay? But he wants to unite the German states with Prussia being the leader and create what was known as the German Empire, all right? So with that, though, he does this by two particular tactics, all right? The first one I'm going to read second because it's my fave, all right? The second one right here, though, is called Realpolitik, all right? Realpolitik, which is realistic politics. It's a very famous quote you should write down that Bismarck said because he's the man. Anyway, now, Bismarck said, laws are a lot like sausages. Everybody likes them, but you don't want to see them made, all right? So he wanted to do realistic politics, okay? How German of a saying is that, though, right? Realistic politics is the idea of making laws based on current needs, right? So to try and keep German liberals and conservatives and socialists from arguing with one another, he decided to do this realistic politics approach to try and base current needs and give different demands to certain groups to try and unite them together against their common enemies, right? So he does things like he establishes schools, right? Public schooling. He does old age insurance is what they called it at the time. We call it like Social Security now. Welfare benefits, different things like that. His second tactic is called Blut Eisen, which is actually not a tactic at all. It's actually a speech that he gave when he was addressing the Reichstag, all right? The Reichstag is the German legislative body. Now, anyway, it's not like a States General or Parliament like the other people we've talked about in the past. It's the Reichstag, all right? Now, the Reichstag meaning ruling House. Stag. Stag being, I believe Stag means house. No, house is H-O-U-S. I gotta look up what Stag means, but Reich means rule. So anyway, now, Blut Eisen, meaning blood and iron, because it was a speech that he gave where he called for the authority and military strength. He knew very well that the main problem coming out of the Congress of Vienna was some of these other European countries were trying to grab up some of their territories, like Schleswig and Holstein, right? So, like where probably von Hoot's family's from. But since they're grabbing it up, he knew that the Germans were going to have to come out the gate ready to fight some wars to win back some of these territories. So, Blut Eisen, in his speech, he said, Germany will not be united by pen and paper. What's up, Jack Ravenhorse? He was just outside. It will be united by blood and iron. Ha! Militarism, right? Good stuff. Really quick, write that word down. Militarism. It's very important because he was a big proponent of it. Militarism is the glorification of the military, the building up of your military, the bringing the military into the dominant perception and eyes of your public, and it being one of the parts of the ruling government class, right? Militarism, the military, right? So, Prussia is going to start moving forward. So step one, put step one over this. Step one, Prussia attempts to expand by annexing some of these loyal German states nearby them, okay? So they begin to grab up everything they can. And I know annex is actually one of your vocab words, I think, this unit, right? Annex, to take control of, expand, or add to, right? Starts trying to annex some of these states. Well, eventually, after he annexes all of the loyal states, he runs into some problems, right? So, particularly that some of these places are actually under the control of some of these other European powers. So he has to fight a series of wars to be able to gain all the territory he needs, okay? Now, I'm going to give you some details of each of these wars, and then you're going to, you don't have to write them down except for one part of it, which is actually super cool, and you'll think it's probably pretty neat. But this is basically to just continue uniting everybody together. Now, the very first war was called the Second Schleswig War. Not War. Second Schleswig War, all right? Mainly because Denmark, right here, so you see Denmark, it was only 9 months long and Prussia's going to win. Denmark decides to attack Denmark decides to attack Denmark. Prussia decides to attack Denmark because Denmark owns two provinces in the north area of the former Holy Roman Empire. It's called Schleswig and Holstein, right? Schleswig and Holstein contain a huge amount of German nobles and a lot of wealth. So Otto von Bismarck decides we need to get them back in because Denmark tries to make a push to rewrite their constitution to include these two states in their formal country. And so Bismarck says, and he recruits Austria to help them out, and they win this Schleswig War in a very quick fashion due to one particular fact. Check this out. Recently invented under the German military banner was this thing called the Dreisse needle gun. And it gave the German army the ability to be able to fire shots much more rapidly than the rest of Europe, right? This is what it looks like. The Dreisse needle gun, invented by a man named Dreisse, is actually one of the very first guns to use a firing pin and bolt action release. An untrained Prussian soldier could fire 2 shots in the same amount of time it took an Austrian man who had been trained at length to fire 1. So you're talking about a huge military development, but the Dreisse needle gun was a massive, massive help, right? Then you've got the Austro-Prussian War. So after the Schleswig War, what happens is Austria decides it's going to try and keep a big area called Bavaria, right? Now, Bavaria is in the south area, and Bavaria is very, very wealthy, but they're devoutly Catholic, just like the Austrians are. So when they try to hold on to Bavaria and bring them into Austria, Bismarck says, and he recruits the entire German military, builds it back up again, gives them all a needle gun, and they walk in and smack Austria in the mouth. Now, the last one has to do with France. Franco-Prussian War. Give you a little background. The French were being ruled over by Napoleon III, Napoleon Bonaparte's nephew. Some of you are like, what happened to Napoleon II? He died at the age of 21 in Italy from tuberculosis. So what ends up happening, though, Napoleon III had rebuilt France in grand style after Napoleon I had been kicked out. He recruited a man named Baron de Haussmann to actually redesign the city of Paris and make these wide streets so they could have grand military parades. They were very militaristic in themselves. He had a big fancy new zoo actually built in Paris. Don't forget that. Big fancy new zoo. A lot of new things that get added into Paris. Now, the Franco-Prussian War only lasted about, I think it's 2 months, right? Only lasted 2 months. Is it 2 months? 9 months. Okay, 2 months was Austro-Prussian. So Austro-Prussian, Austria gets smacked. Franco-Prussian lasts 9 months. And it's mainly due to this thing. What happened is they had a battle at the border of France and Germany because France actually still owned 2 areas that the German Empire wanted. They're called Alsace and Lorraine, all right? So they have some cultural-speaking Germans there, and Bismarck decides he wants it back. So Napoleon III meets him, and start jotting this down while I'm telling you the story, and also make sure you get the last title. Napoleon III meets him at this place called Sedan, S-E-D-A-N, on the border of France and Germany. And at the Battle of the Sedan, Bismarck's forces royally rock the French in the teeth, right? They just beat him up real, real bad. They capture Napoleon III, and they bring him over, and they hold him as a prisoner of war. Now, during this entire situation, the Paris Republic, or the Paris Commune, is formed because the people in Paris were like, oh, it's okay, we don't want Napoleon anyway. We're just going to turn ourselves into a republic. And they formed the French Second Republic. You know, the French First Republic was from the Revolution. And so what Bismarck decides to do is like, all right, you want to play that game? Fine. And so they set up a perimeter all the way around Paris, and they plan to starve them out until they decide to quit and give up. So in Paris, they were starving, and they had actually resorted to eating the zoo animals out of that new zoo that was built by Napoleon III. It's pretty jacked up when you think about it. But the Parisians end up eventually surrendering, and in the Palace of Versailles, in the Hall of Mirrors, what a huge "we hate you" from the German people to the French. In the Hall of Mirrors, in Louis XIV's former throne, Kaiser Wilhelm, William in English, but write Wilhelm above this, W-I-L-H-E-L-M, the first, was crowned Kaiser, or Emperor, of the German Empire and all of the German states in 1871, actually completing the mission and creating the German state. It's an amazing, amazing feat. And he literally did it in their national house. It's ridiculous, all right? So after this, as you can tell, the French and the Germans begin to hate each other. Like, they absolutely hate each other after the German unification process. Now, what he's going to do, though, Wilhelm establishes a new government based with the German language, German culture, German credo, everything German at its core, right? So now what they're going to do is Germany is going to grow massively strong in a very short amount of time, all right? What they're going to do, though, how do you do it? How do you get the strongest, the quickest way you possibly can without war? Boom, you industrialize, right? So going on during this entire time period, or actually we're right on the heels of it, but we're going to get into it over the break as well, the Industrial Revolution had been occurring, right? So Germany decides to industrialize and build its industry up as much as it possibly can. They take the cues from the English and they actually create factories and they start building up a lot of different stuff. They become an industrial powerhouse in Europe, mainly due to the fact that they did all of this. Write just the underlined stuff, okay? Just the underlined stuff. Don't write everything else, it's just examples, all right? So what they're going to do, though, Germany made this possible because they had large amounts of coal and iron inside of the German areas, so they had a lot to work with. They had an educated workforce, because remember, Bismarck started those realistic politics where you had education for all. Everyone was expected to go to school, right? And then also massive population growth, which gives you a lot of workers and also a lot of soldiers in your military, right? They're also going to build up their railroads and their infrastructure. They're going to dig new canals and transportation areas. They're going to discover how to produce steel, which is a very strong, much lighter, more flexible form of iron than iron itself is, or pig iron, which is what they were making earlier on. They're also going to take science and apply it to their economics by creating new chemicals, dyes, things like that to make a lot of money. And then they're also going to create their own currency that was backed up by gold, and it was called the Deutsche Mark, right? So Germany making a lot of money, moving real, real fast. Now, don't need that. Don't write that. Don't write that. That's lame. But then we had this problem happen. Kaiser Wilhelm II, a Hohenzollern himself, son of Wilhelm I. Write this down before we go any further. Ignore his stupid mustache. But he is going to be the Kaiser of Germany when World War I breaks out. And he's kind of half the reason why it happened. Now, let's talk about this cat real quick. Extremely militaristic. Like, very. Write that down. What does he do the second he comes into office and he is crowned Kaiser? What's the dumbest thing he could do? Ooh, I hear a lot of guesses, but guess what? I hate to say it, but Sean Martin, good job. That's right. He fired Bismarck. Oh, what are you doing? So he fires Bismarck, the man that almost single-handedly united the entire country together, because he said he was puppeteering his father the entire time. He didn't like how he thought that his father looked like a stooge by comparison to Bismarck, the man, right? Well, honestly, I'm not even going to lie to you. Wilhelm was kind of a stooge anyway. But going forward, though, Wilhelm II also, he did some positive stuff. He was able to unite all Germans together by creating social welfare programs, public schools for all, building up the military. But a couple other weird things about him, that's the last thing you'll write for this. A couple other weird things about him. Actually, hold on. Write this is the last thing. Looking ahead, though, he did try to build up the military way too fast, and he believed in their dominance leading into World War I. And a couple other little things about his personality. Oh, fun fact, he had a dead arm. His arm, he had amniotic banding when he was being born, which is where the umbilical cord gets wrapped around certain parts of the body. And it led to permanent nerve damage in his arm. So his arm kept growing, but he couldn't move it, really. He had barely any movement, no feeling in it whatsoever. So he's always really, really self-conscious about it. And so much so that, like, he would actually have military pictures of himself painted. I'll show you really quick. Where he would actually try to hide it. Wilhelm II. There he is. Where he'd actually try to hide it by having his hand propped up like this. See that? Propped up like his fingers stuck in his belt so it looked like it had some type of movement. Or he would have it held on in his hand, but he actually could not move it almost at all. This is one of my favorite ones. He has it propped up on top of a sword. But he had no feeling in that arm. And a lot of other weird things about him. But, yeah, that's it. That's the nationalism movement in Germany. The second flip that's going to be coming up this weekend that'll be up before Memorial Day weekend, I might use the one that I use for CP because it's really good, is about the Industrial Revolution. So, that's it. I hope you all have a great weekend. Enjoy yourself. Try to bang this out this afternoon before you really, really get into your weekend. But y'all have a good one. Stay safe. I'll see you guys when you come back. Bye.